Howdy. Good to see y'all tonight. We're going to be in the book of Genesis tonight. We've been there for several weeks, and it'll be a while yet before we get through the wonderful book of beginnings, the book of Genesis. Tonight we're in the 15th, 16th, and 17th chapters. We're in the middle of a huge story tonight that is just way too big to be told in one or two sermons, and so I think we're the third or fourth time in this very same sermon of story of Abram. And tonight we're going to watch Abram go ahead and continue to live his life by faith. But I'm going to call my sermon tonight the ups and downs of living by faith. The ups and downs of living by faith. The reason I'm going to say that is because if we were really honest with each other, living by faith is not a steady, constant thing. I'm just speaking for me personally. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. Sometimes it's 3 steps forward, and then next week it's 2 steps backward. It seems like we never can get it down completely. It's up and down. So tonight we're going to follow Abram as he attempts to live by faith. We're going to watch him, and there's going to be times when he's going to soar, and there's going to be times he's going to crash. But all the time, now get this now, all the time, soaring or crashing, we're going to notice that the hand of God is in his life. Everywhere he goes, God's with him. God's blessing him. And God's taking care of him in the good times and in the bad times. And I like that because I need to know God's there with us, not just when I'm good, but when I'm bad. And when everything's going well, when things don't go well. In fact, we probably need to know more that God's there in the bad times. Also tonight, we're going to get a little insight into the tensions that are in the Middle East today. If you watch the news tonight, there is some tension in the Middle East. I don't know if you knew that or not. It's not, they're not getting along over there well, and it's been an interesting year as we watched the Middle East have the Arab Spring, and we've watched the rebellions and the revolts in a lot of Arab countries, and we know that there's an ongoing dislike between the Arabs and the Jews. There is this tension that goes on over there. Where does that come from? Where did that get started? And so tonight we're going to show you the biblical roots of that tension and where that all roots from. Tonight we're going to watch God set in motion a family. Now God is doing something uniquely new here in the book of Genesis with Abram. He started with a man and a woman, and then went through some really failures. Then things got really bad with Noah. God wiped it out, extinction event, and emptied the world of people, except for a few. And then after the flood, he began and started over a few generations later with a man named Abram. And this man Abram is going to be one that God blesses. God's going to keep his hand on him. And he's not going to just start now with a whole group of people, but he's going to start with a family. And through this one family of Abram, he's going to bless the entire world. And we're going to watch that tonight as it gets started. Tonight we're going to notice that God's going to keep his word to Abram and others even when they fail and when they stumble. I want to say tonight, and to give you the hope and encouragement, that God is going to keep his word. He will keep his promises to you. When God makes a promise to anyone in the Bible, he makes that same promise to all of us, all of his children. And tonight God's going to keep his word. He will do the same things for you that he did for Abram. He will bless you. He will make your enemies his enemies. He will make your friends his friends. God is going to keep all those promises that he's made to anybody tonight. He's going to make them to you. We're now passing down in time. We've gone from a time when Abram went and rescued Lot from the little skirmish war they had there in the Dead Sea area between those 9 different city-states, 4 against 5, and when Lot got captured, we've come through that. Now we've passed through the Melchizedek experience where Abram met this strange king of Salem, this king of peace, this king of Shalom, and this man that we think is unique in the Old Testament. And Melchizedek is a strange and amazing person. And we talked about him last week, looked into his life. And now time has passed. We've come past this. Abram is settling in to his home up here around Hebron. He's been living here a while. And then Abram is going to be sitting, and he's going to, we don't know exactly what he's doing, but we know he has a vision. Now this is a vision that is a time when God comes and speaks to Abram. God does a very miraculous thing and interrupts a man's life and speaks to him in this visionary form. I don't know if God's ever given you a vision or ever spoken to you. A lot of people that I meet through my life have had experiences where God spoke very pointedly and very clearly to them and gave them direction and things. This is one of those times that Abram got to be in the presence of God and hear His word completely. This is what he said, chapter 15. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield and your very great reward. Abram is beginning to have struggles with his faith because God has promised him an extremely large heritage, a family that's going to fill up the planet. God's promised Abram that. And now time's passing and time's getting longer and he's getting older and Sarah's getting older and no child. And so they're beginning to sort of have a doubt and question. And so when God begins to renew this vision, He comes to Abram and He said, Abram, I am going to be your very great reward. I'm going to be the blessing for you. You're going to be blessed. And so Abram has to deal with that and want to hear that God is renewing His promise. Now, something that you will want to remember, and that is that every time God reveals something to you, anytime God shows you something, an idea, a vision, a mission, a truth, an understanding, anytime God shows you a new thing, then there is a problem that immediately exists, and that is a crisis of faith. You have to believe it and accept it. And if we don't have these new experiences, if everything just goes along unchanged for decades, then you don't have to worry about this. But once in a while, God will come to you in the middle of your life and He'll say, I want you to start a cowboy church. Or He'll say, I want you to do something totally different or radical that you didn't see coming, you didn't plan to do. And when God does that, then immediately you're forced to deal with another faith issue. Is this what God wants? Is God really speaking? Is God blessing? Will He take care of me? All those things, we have to deal with that. So, verse 2, but Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? See, immediately he went right back to that thing, that big focus of his life that's missing. You're going to have children. And all of a sudden, he has no children. He's 80, 90 years old, no children. And so it's a big deal, and so it's in the front of everything. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. Okay. When Abram came through Damascus on his way down, on his way to the Promised Land, he apparently hired a chief of staff, this Eliezer, and this guy was there to take care of everything, to help him and to be his main man, his vice president, his chief, whatever. He was some huge person in Abram's life. Now, in the ancient world, when a person has no heir to pass things on to, then everything that he has goes to one of his most trusted employees, or and so that's what happens here. So Abram says, well, God, I guess it's going to be Eliezer of Damascus. He's going to be the one. You've given me no children, so this servant will be my heir. Then verse 4, God then gets very clear with Abram. He clears the air. He removes all doubt, because Abram's confused. You'd be confused, I'd be confused. So God says, no, wait a minute, Abram, listen very carefully. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky, count the stars. If indeed you can count them, Then he said to them, so shall your offspring be. Now immediately, Abram is right back in this crisis of faith. I love to see this because I've been there lots of times myself. When God promised something and then there's always this crisis. Is it going to happen? Are you going to take care of me? Will you bless it? Whatever. And so God says, okay, look around again. Here's the promise. It's going to happen for you. Now, the next thing that is quoted in the book of Genesis is one of the most important theological points in the Bible. I mean, this next point, this next thing we're going to talk about, is very crucial to your spirituality, to your faith, to your growth, to your eternity. And here's what it is. I'm going to tell you that Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness. Now let me unpack that. This is absolutely mind-boggling. God took Abram's faith and he translated it into righteousness. Abram was a failed, miserable sinner, messed up. Sometimes he's big, sometimes he's down, sometimes he's good, you know. But God said, no, that's not what really matters. I'm going to take your faith and I'm going to translate it into righteousness. It's going to become righteousness. He didn't tell Abram to be righteous. He always told him to trust me, to follow me. And so what I want to say to you tonight is, some of you, all of us, I'm sorry, want to be righteous in God's sight. We want God to like us. We want to be able to hang out with God. We want to be able to talk to Him. We want to have a good, clean conscience and a clean heart. We want that and desire that. And so we try to do good. We try to do good things. We help others. But that's not how you get righteous. Your righteousness comes when you trust. When you live by faith, God gives it, turns it into righteousness. That's the most important thing I want you to know tonight. Now, poor Abram, he's just like you and I. And he says, well, Lord, I get it. That's a good idea. But how do I know for sure? How do I know for sure? How do I know that I know that I know that I know that I know? How do I know for sure, God, that what you've told me is true? And then I'm going to be okay. Well, let's read verse 7. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? How am I going to know it, God? Okay. Anybody in here ever had doubts about your faith or doubts about your life or your decisions? How are you going to know for sure you're doing God's will? How do I know I'm right? How do I know this is... Well, that's a big question. We all want to deal with that every day of our life. And so Abram was no different. He had that same question. How do I know, God, you're going to do it? So God then began to set up a covenant or a contract. In our modern language, we'd understand that word contract better than covenant. And so God made this contract with Abram. He said, okay, Abram, here's what's going to happen. I want you to get some animals, some cattle and some goats and whatever, and birds, and I want you to sacrifice them. We're going to make a sacrifice. And so Abram got these animals. He cut them in two, and he put them on each side. I'm imagining a little path. I could see a path between them. So there's animals over here, half an animal over here, and half an animal over here. And that's what God said. Lay that all out like a sacrifice before me, and because I'm going to make a covenant with you. Now what he meant was that these animals, their death, their blood, would be the signature, the affidavit, the thing that gave it authority to the contract. These animals' blood, in other words, it's a big deal to them, and their blood, their death is going to be the authority or the signature on this covenant. That's how this is going to work. And in the ancient world, that's how they did things. That's how they would make a covenant. They would make a covenant and they would kill an animal because that would signify or make it authoritative. So that's what happened. So as we see there in verse 9 and 10, that Abram did all this and laid it out and before the Lord. Now, as we move on down, here is the covenant promises that God made to Abram. Now listen carefully. He says, your family will live outside of the promised land as slaves. Now, as in verse 12 there and following, we're going to see that God says, look, for 400 years, your people are going to live in a country that's not theirs. They're going to be slaves down here in a place. Does anybody know where that is? Egypt. That's when Moses went down and got his people out. Well, that's what God was prophesying to Abram. Now, all that future, he said, that's what's going to happen to your kids. Now, sometimes we think that when we're following the Lord and we're in a covenant relationship with Him and we're doing everything we're supposed to do, that everything will be great. Even our kids will be great. Listen, it's not that way. It doesn't always work that way. God's bigger than that, better than that, and He does things that He needs to do to create in us the heart, the maturity that we need to have. So God said, I want to just tell you up front that for 400 years, your children, your family are going to be slaves down in Egypt. They're going to be mistreated there. And anyway, but then He says down about verse 14, He promised him, He said, but I'm going to punish those Egyptians. Or He didn't say Egyptians, but I'm going to punish those people. And when they finally come out, they're going to be rich with great possessions. So and then He said to Abram, you're going to live a long time, and you're going to be buried, and going to go live with your ancestors, and be in peace and be buried at a good old age. And then after 4 generations, your family is going to come back to the promised land that I sent them to, because the Amorites, the people who live in the land of Canaan, their time's going to be over, and I'm going to bring your people back. Now, when we jump down to verse 17, God tells him, Abram, how big the promised land is going to be. And He makes an agreement with him and a covenant with him. Now let's just read this. This gets interesting. Verse 17. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. Now, what are the pieces? Well, remember, half the calf's over here, half the calf's over here, and the lamb and the lamb and the goat and the goat. And so when it gets dark, a smoking firepot and a torch walk between them. That's all they see. All Abram sees is just this thing walking between them. But it signifies that God is there giving authority and His signature to the promises. Now, then He says, Abram, I'm going to give you the land from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. In chapter 15, He says that's going to be all your land, where all these people live, and He defines the promised land. That's the definition of it. Now we go to chapter 16. If you'll remember, as we started tonight, I promised you we're going to get a little insight into the problems that are going on in the Middle East right now. Okay, here we go. Chapter 16. We're going to meet Hagar and Ishmael. And I'm going to show you tonight that how the tension between the Jewish people and the Arab people root back to this event that we have here in chapter 16. Let me just kind of tell you what's going on. All right, Abram has this promise. God is going to give me children. But Abram's getting on in years. And Sarah is getting on in years. And she's past the time for childbearing. She's having hot flashes. And worse, right? Like you know what I'm talking about? I mean, she's getting, you know what I'm saying? Okay. She's getting old. And the time for her childbearing is past. And Abram's getting old. And so, you know, he's I'm going to leave it at that. He's getting old. And they didn't have any kids.
Enough said.
And it didn't look like they was going to ever have any kids. And so Sarah says, okay, Abram, I've got an idea. You know, here's what we're going to do. I know you don't want to, but I'm going to give you my good-looking Egyptian young slave. And I want you to go and sleep with her for a while. I'm sure he hated that, you know. I mean, he didn't want to, you know. But he did, and they had a boy. They had a little. She got pregnant, and as soon as she got pregnant, she began to get all puffed up with pride, and she couldn't get along with Sarah any longer. I mean, they got crossways with each other because, I mean, the young slave girl was pregnant with her husband's child, and you know, just didn't work out. Who ever thought a man could live with two women? I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, that's just impossible. I mean, you can't hardly live with one. And the two. Sorry, honey, you don't teach me. She said, I may get to live by myself for a while. Now, if you follow me down to verse 5, you're going to see that Sarah blames Abram for this problem. I thought that was kind of cute. Well, let's just read it. Then Sarah said to Abram, "You're responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between me and you." Well, you can imagine the conflict in that family, and the anger and the frustration for years of being childless, and then a little slave girl. I mean, you can imagine the frustrations that are here. Well, Sarah and Hagar, they weren't getting along at all. They were mistreating each other. It was really, really bad. So Sarah runs Hagar away. She asks her to leave, and she leaves with her child later. The child and Sarah and Hagar leave, and they go off to their own life. Now, so let me just stop right here and tell you that Abram's children are the Jewish nation. Hagar's children are the Arab nations. She is the mother of those Arabs. So this is where the Arab and Israeli hatred roots back to. It's jealousy over who's the right heir, who got the blessing, who didn't get the blessing, etc. That's where it all comes back to here with this Egyptian slave girl and the Jewish man. Now God found, the angel of the Lord found Hagar and sent her back to Sarah. Let's read what we find in verse 7. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur, and he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." All right, here's what the angel of the Lord said. Hagar, go home. Go back to Sarah. Submit yourself to her. In other words, lower your pride, your ego. Stop being so arrogant, and stop flaunting your pregnancy in her. You know, don't stop making her feel bad. Go back and submit to her. And if you do that, I'm going to bless this child that's in you, and I'm going to make him as numerous as the stars, just like the other children that are going to come through Sarah later. So Ishmael is then, God begins to promise about Ishmael. He makes a promise about him. In verse 12, his personality is described. Now get this. He's going to describe the personality of Ishmael and the Arab nations. He's going to describe their personality and how they're going to be with each other. And he says he's going to be a wild ass. That's what it says here. I didn't cuss. I'm just telling you what it says here. He says you're going to be, let's read verse 12. He's going to be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Folks, the Arabs cannot get along with each other and with anybody else. And this prophecy has come true. I mean, this is where this all roots back to. And so it's easy to see this. Hagar learned that God was watching over her and cared for her. Please listen to me. God watches over and cares for every person. He loves the Arabs just as much as He loves the Jews. He does. He loves the Chinese just as much as He loves the Orientals or the Koreans or the American. I mean, He loves everybody, and He's watching over them. And so she called on the Lord. He heard her, and she gave God the name of the one who watches. The one who watches. Hagar returns, gives birth to Ishmael, and so they have. And Abram is 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Now, chapter 17. Have you ever heard the term for God called El Shaddai? Anybody ever heard the term El Shaddai? That's one of the names of God. He is called the one who, the El Shaddai, or I am God Almighty. Now here is where God introduces himself as that name. Let's read chapter 17. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am El Shaddai. He said that. I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers. 99 years old now. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, as for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. Now get this, the frustration here, the absurdity of this. Abram's 99 years old, and his wife is old. And God says, no, it's going to happen. Let's keep reading, verse 5. No longer will you be called Abram, your name will be Abraham. And here's where Abram becomes Abraham. When God renews the promise and blesses him and makes him the father of many nations, makes him, and those things begin to happen. He forms a covenant with him, and then describes the land of Canaan where they're going to live, and he talks about how that God's going to be with him, etc. Now then, God says, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you a symbol, a sign of covenant. This is going to be our sign. And I want this symbol or sign to be passed down through the generations of all the Jewish people. This will be the signet. It is called circumcision. A circumcised male is the sign of covenant between God and the Jewish nations. And so all the Jewish people were circumcised at this time. Abram was circumcised at 99 years of age, and everybody in his household, all the males, were circumcised to come under that covenant symbol. And today is still the covenant symbol with the Jewish people. Then we get down to verse verse 15, and Sarai becomes Sarah. God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Now, I told you the other day that the difference here is the letter H. Sarah, Sarai, Sarah. And it's the letter H. And the H is pronounced with a breath. Okay? And that breath is symbolic of the breath of God. God's breath is now breathed into the name Abram, and it becomes Abraham. Sarai becomes Sarah. All right? So God's name, His breath is in their names. He's going to bless them, even if they're very old. Now, then Abram and Sarah both, they laugh at the absurdity. Yeah. They laugh at God. And if you'll remember later, Sarah laughs again. And it's curious because they named the boy Isaac, which means laughter. Isaac means laughter. And so they give the child the name of laughter. Now in verse 18, what about Ishmael? And Abram said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. See, Abram wanted this boy to be blessed because he had loved him and it was his child and he wanted to stay. He wanted him to be blessed too. But God promised him then, no, this is all going to be a blessing I'm going to give to you, Abram, and your wife, Sarah. Abraham and Sarah, you're going to give birth to the Jewish nation through Isaac. Now, I'm almost finished. Now I'm going to preach the sermon. Our job is faith. That's our job description. We are to be people of faith. We're to live by faith, to walk by faith, to die by faith. We do everything by faith. God's job is keeping promises. Our job is faith. God's job is keeping promises. All right? You get that? Sometimes we try to cross job descriptions with God, but that's not going to work that way. Now, when God gives His word, when He makes a covenant agreement with you, He will keep it no matter how impossible it may seem. 99-year-old man and an old woman, seems impossible for them to have a child. But God will keep His promises, I don't care what. So why should we trust God? Why should we? Well, number one, His plan is always better than ours. Right. Notice what man's plan was. Well, let's help God out. Let's make Eleazar my servant. Well, let him be my heir. No, God said, not him. Well, let's have Ishmael. I'll have sex with Hagar, and we'll produce a child, and then that boy Ishmael, that'll be my heir. God said, good idea. No cigar. That's not what I want to do. That's not what I want to do. I want to work through you. I want to work through you and your wife. So trust God. He's going to do it right. Now, faith, number 2, and final point. Faith is our only way to ever be righteous. You will never be righteous on your own, other than by believing God and trusting Him. Faith is our way. All of your good intentions, your grand efforts to be accepted by God are going to fail. Only faith is going to make you righteous. You remember nephew Lot? Nephew Lot was a failure in just about every way you could imagine. Except the Bible calls him a righteous man. He's called Saint Lot, even to this day. He's a righteous. Why is he called a righteous man? Because he believed God. Just like Abram, believed God. So you're going to have to learn to trust Him. And keep your eyes fixed on Jehovah. That's enough. So stop trying and start trusting. Now, even when we fail God, He sees our needs and He restores our lives. When you fail, when you go backward, when you should be growing in the Lord and you're going backward, please remember, God sees you, He knows your needs, and He still loves you, and He's going to still meet your needs, even if you fail. It's not about us winning or losing or failing or succeeding. It's about trusting. Trust God. Hold on to your faith. That's all that's going to matter. Hold on to that. Let God restore. Live by faith and allow God to make you righteous. You can't make you righteous, but God can when you trust Him and live by faith. Let's pray.